My only focus is to go back to the boat and then hire or beg people to help me go find some areas to search.
What compels someone to report a tragedy while the evidence on their hands tells a different story? When does a rescue mission transform into a crime scene investigation? How long can molecular truth survive beneath layers of salt water, sunlight, and deliberate erasure? These aren't philosophical exercises. They're operational questions. Federal forensic examiners are answering right now inside a warehouse in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where a sailboat called the Soulmate sits. Under investigative lights, every surface accessible, every compartment open, every microscopic trace being documented by technologies that see what human vision cannot. The answers emerging from that examination haven't been made public yet. The tools producing those answers are the most advanced in forensic science. And what they're designed to detect is the one substance that refuses to disappear completely, no matter how thoroughly someone tries to make it vanish: human blood. While other channels speculate and sensationalize, True Crime Vic brings you the forensic reality behind the headlines, sourced directly from investigative records, official statements, and the scientific processes that separate fact from fiction. If you want the truth behind the evidence, not just the drama behind the disappearance, make sure you like this video and subscribe to True Crime Vic. Because what you're about to hear is the documented account of how a sailing paradise became a federal murder investigation, and why the boat at the center of it all may hold answers its owner never intended to preserve. April 4th, 2026. Hopetown, Bahamas. A small community in the Abaco Islands, known for its candy-striped lighthouse and turquoise waters. That evening, around 7:30, two people climbed into an 8-foot inflatable dinghy and motored away from the dock. Their names were Brian and Lynette Hooker. Their destination was a sailboat moored at Elbow Cay, a short crossing under normal conditions. The vessel waiting for them was called the Soulmate, a 40-foot cruising sailboat that served as both their home and their identity. For months, the Hookers had documented their life aboard that boat on social media, posting under the handle The Sailing Hookers on TikTok. Their content showed sunsets over open water, island anchorages, the romanticized version of leaving conventional life behind for something untethered. Thousands of people followed their journey. On the evening of April 4th, that journey ended in a way none of those followers could have anticipated. According to Brian Hooker, Lynette fell overboard during the crossing. According to his account, she went into the water and took the engine kill switch lanyard with her, shutting down the outboard motor. According to his explanation, the currents and wind separated them in the darkness, and despite his efforts, he could not reach her. According to the timeline he provided, he paddled the small dinghy for hours, eventually arriving at Marsh Harbor Marina at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning on April 5th. That timeline presents an immediate problem. The distance between Hopetown and Elbow Cay is not an 8.5-hour paddle under any documented conditions. The crossing, even in adverse weather, should take a fraction of that time. So the first question investigators faced wasn't whether Lynette Hooker had gone overboard. It was what happened during those 8.5 hours between 7:30 in the evening and 4 in the morning, and why the account provided didn't align with the geography, the distance, or the basic physics of small boat navigation in those waters. Brian Hooker reported his wife missing when he arrived at Marsh Harbor Marina. Bahamian authorities initiated a search based on the information he provided. They deployed resources to the areas he described. They searched the waters where he said the incident occurred. Days passed. Lynette Hooker was not found. On April 8th, Bahamian police arrested Brian Hooker. He was questioned. He was held. On April 13th, he was released without being charged. His attorney in the Bahamas, Terrell Butler, confirmed that his client had cooperated with authorities and denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. On April 14th, Brian Hooker gave an interview to ABC News. In that interview, he stated that his only focus was returning to the boat and finding people to help him search areas where Lynette might be. He expressed his intention to continue looking. Shortly after that interview, Brian Hooker left the Bahamas. His legal team stated he was traveling to be with his terminally ill mother. The Soulmate remained in Bahamian waters. Arrangements were being made to relocate the vessel. Then the United States Coast Guard intervened. In mid-May 2026, as the Soulmate was departing Bahamian waters under the control of a transport captain reportedly hired to move the boat, the Coast Guard intercepted it. They didn't wait for it to dock in Florida. They didn't allow it to complete its transit. They seized it at the point of departure, taking immediate custody of the vessel and everything on it. A Coast Guard spokesperson confirmed the seizure was conducted as part of an ongoing criminal investigation into the disappearance of Lynette Hooker. Not a missing persons case, not a recovery operation, a criminal investigation. That distinction is not semantic. It reflects the evidentiary threshold that had already been crossed before the boat ever reached American custody. By the time the Soulmate was intercepted, investigators had already discovered something that transformed the case from a tragic accident report into a possible homicide. GPS data extracted from Brian Hooker's personal electronic device showed movements that contradicted the account he had given to investigators. A United States official confirmed to CBS News that the data told a different story than his words. The specifics of that contradiction have not been fully disclosed, but the investigative response to it has been. The original search conducted by Bahamian authorities was based on the locations Brian Hooker described. The GPS data indicated those locations were incorrect. The search had been conducted in the wrong area because the account guiding it was inconsistent with the electronic record of where his device had actually been during the hours in question. When federal authorities re-engaged, they brought a dive team. They returned to the Bahamas with resources calibrated not for surface search, but for underwater recovery in areas the original search had not prioritized. The designation of the case was elevated. The Coast Guard Investigative Service, known as CGIs, took the lead. The FBI became involved, and the Soulmate became evidence. After seizure, the vessel was brought to Fort Pierce, Florida, where it was moored at a Coast Guard station. Photographs confirmed its presence there. By May 12th, News Nation reported that initial forensic testing had already begun at that location. But Fort Pierce did not have the infrastructure to conduct the level of examination federal investigators required. Specifically, authorities could not pull the vessel completely out of the water there. That capability mattered because forensic access to a boat is fundamentally different when it's floating versus when it's on dry land in a controlled environment. A floating vessel limits examiner access to surfaces below the waterline, creates contamination risks from the surrounding aquatic environment, and prevents the complete spatial documentation that a full extraction allows. So the Soulmate was moved again, this time to Fort Lauderdale, where federal authorities had access to a warehouse facility capable of hauling the entire vessel out of the water and placing it in a controlled forensic workspace. That's where it is now. That's where federal examiners have been working through every inch of it since mid-2026. A United States official told Fox News Digital that once the boat was pulled from the water, it would be taken to a warehouse to be combed for clues. Former FBI Special Agent Nicole Parker, speaking to the same outlet, described what that process involves. Digital devices are extracted, computer systems are analyzed, navigation electronics are downloaded. Everything that can produce data is harvested. But the examination isn't limited to electronics. The physical surfaces of the boat, the spaces where people lived, worked, moved, and potentially bled, are subjected to forensic protocols that can detect biological material the human eye will never register. This is where the science of luminol enters the investigation, and why the title of this episode is not speculative. Luminol is a chemical compound that reacts with hemoglobin, the iron-containing protein present in human blood. When luminol solution is applied to a surface in darkness and activated with a specific wavelength of light, it produces a blue-white fluorescence wherever hemoglobin molecules are present. The reaction occurs even if the blood is no longer visible, even if the surface has been wiped clean, even if days or weeks have passed since the blood was deposited. The molecular bond between hemoglobin and the surface persists at levels invisible to the naked eye, but fully detectable by luminol. That's the property that makes it forensically significant in this case. A surface can appear completely clean and still react to luminol if blood was present and subsequently removed. The cleaning itself doesn't erase the molecular trace. In many cases, it concentrates it at the edges of where the cleaning stopped, creating patterns that are more defined under luminol than the original bloodstain would have been. The interior of a sailboat, like the Soulmate, is a series of confined spaces. The galley, which is the boat's kitchen, contains countertops, a sink, a stove, and storage compartments in close proximity. The head, the onboard bathroom, is a narrow enclosure with a toilet, a sink, and minimal ventilation. The cabin sole, the floor, is typically fiberglass or sealed teak. The companionway, the staircase connecting the outdoor cockpit to the interior cabin, is a height graphic surface often finished with anti-slip material. The cockpit itself, where the boat is steered and controlled, is gel-coat fiberglass, a material known for retaining microscopic biological residue in its textured surface. Every one of these areas is now accessible to forensic examiners in Fort Lauderdale. Every surface can be treated with luminol. Every reaction can be photographed, mapped, and analyzed. If blood was present anywhere on that boat and subsequently cleaned, luminol will show where it was and what pattern the cleaning followed. Forensic examiners also conduct what's called differential cleaning analysis. A boat that two people lived on for an extended period carries a specific signature of use. Some surfaces are cleaned regularly. Others accumulate residue consistent with their function. A forensic team examining the Soulmate can establish what the normal habitation pattern looks like by comparing surface cleanliness across the vessel. If one area is significantly cleaner than everything surrounding it, and that elevated cleanliness can't be explained by how the space was normally used, it becomes a forensic anomaly. It suggests targeted cleaning inconsistent with routine maintenance. That differential is evidence in itself, separate from what luminol might reveal. DNA swabs add another layer. Biological material collected from surfaces throughout the boat is analyzed and compared against known DNA profiles of Brian and Lynette Hooker. The presence of DNA in locations inconsistent with normal use is significant. So is the absence of DNA in areas where it should be present based on habitation patterns. A couple living together on a small boat leaves biological traces in predictable distributions. Deviations from that pattern require explanation. Digital evidence recovered from the Soulmate operates independently of the physical forensics, but answers equally critical questions. The vessel carried GPS navigation equipment that logged position, speed, and heading. Those logs exist, whether or not the boat was underway. Even a vessel at anchor generates electronic records if its systems were active. Investigators now have access to the Soulmate's own navigation data for the period covering April 4th and the days that followed. That data can be compared against the GPS record from Brian Hooker's personal device. If the boat was in one location, while his device was in another during the same time frame, that divergence is not an interpretive question. It's a collision between two independent electronic records. Modern vessels also carry monitoring systems that store data remotely in cloud servers. Thermal cameras and other sensors may have been active on the night of April 4th. That data, if it exists, has been preserved in cloud storage since it was generated and doesn't require physical access to the vessel to retrieve. The timeline between Lynette's disappearance and the federal seizure of the Soulmate is forensically significant, not because evidence degrades during that period, but because of what access to the vessel during that window means. Brian Hooker was arrested on April 8th, but released on April 13th. He gave a media interview on April 14th and left the Bahamas shortly afterward, reportedly in mid-April. The Soulmate remained moored in the Abacus. Between April 5th, when Lynette was reported missing, and mid-May, when the Coast Guard seized the vessel, the boat was accessible. If someone with access to that boat attempted to clean its surfaces during that window, the cleaning itself would leave forensic traces. Luminol doesn't just find blood. It finds the effort to remove blood. The molecular chemistry of hemoglobin persists in concentrations that cleaning reduces, but does not eliminate. The surface that has been scrubbed shows that scrubbing in the pattern luminol reveals. 5 weeks elapsed between the disappearance and the seizure. In forensic terms, that duration does not present a degradation problem for interior surfaces. The cabin, galley, and head are protected from direct ultraviolet light and rainfall. The materials used in boat construction, fiberglass, marine-grade wood, stainless steel, retain biological evidence for extended periods under those conditions. The temperature stability provided by the thermal mass of surrounding water further preserves trace material. The concern isn't whether evidence survived 5 weeks. It's what that evidence shows about the period when the vessel was accessible, and what may have occurred on its surfaces before federal custody locked down the chain of evidence. The Coast Guard Investigative Service and the FBI are not building a case around a single piece of evidence. They're assembling what investigators call an evidentiary portfolio. The GPS contradiction from Brian Hooker's personal device is one element. The navigation data from the Soulmate's own systems is another. The luminol analysis results will be another. DNA distribution patterns will be another. Differential cleaning findings will be another. The forensic examination of the 8-foot dinghy, which was also taken into federal custody, will be another. Thermal camera cloud data, if recovered, will be another. When federal prosecutors evaluate whether to file charges, they assess the portfolio as a whole. The question isn't whether any individual piece of evidence is conclusive. The question is whether the totality of documented evidence supports a criminal charge beyond a reasonable doubt. The case has been formally designated a possible murder investigation. That classification, confirmed by a Coast Guard spokesperson to News Nation and by a United States official to CBS News, is not speculative. It reflects an evidentiary determination that homicide is consistent with the physical and electronic evidence already gathered. It authorizes the deployment of federal resources at the level required for a criminal prosecution. It means the investigation is proceeding not as a missing person recovery, but as a homicide case where the victim's body has not been located. Brian Hooker has not been charged. His attorney in the Bahamas stated he cooperated with authorities and denied wrongdoing. His attorney's statements indicated he left the islands to be with family during a medical crisis. He gave a media interview expressing his intention to continue searching for his wife. These facts are documented. What is also documented is that the vessel he lived on with Lynette Hooker, the boat that was their home and their public identity, is now in a federal warehouse being examined by forensic specialists with access to technologies that detect what cannot be seen and recover what someone may have tried to erase. The Soulmate carried more than 2 people. It carried the record of what happened to them, written in data logs, surface residues, and molecular traces that persist regardless of intent. Forensic science doesn't reconstruct events in real time. It reads what remains on the surfaces of that sailboat, in the memory of its navigation systems, in the patterns that luminol will either reveal or rule out, constitutes the physical truth of this case. Those findings exist. They are being documented. They have not been publicly released. When they are, True Crime Vic will bring them to you with the same commitment to verified sources and forensic accuracy that guided this investigation from the beginning. Lynette Hooker case, the forensic foundation of a federal murder investigation, built on evidence that couldn't be washed away. If you want to see when the findings are made public, subscribe to True Crime Vic and turn on notifications so you don't miss the conclusion of this case. Hit the like button if you value fact-based true crime analysis over speculation, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. The evidence is being processed. The answers are coming, and True Crime Vic will be here to walk you through every documented detail when they arrive. If what Brian Hooker described actually happened on the night of April 4th, the 8-foot dinghy carries the physical record of that event. If what the GPS data suggests happened instead, that same dinghy carries a different record entirely. Every surface of that small vessel, the floor, the sides, the transom where the outboard motor mounts, has been in federal custody since the seizure and subjected to the identical forensic examination protocols applied to the Soulmate. Luminol testing, DNA swabs, differential analysis. The dinghy was the last object in physical contact with both Brian and Lynette Hooker on the evening she disappeared. What its surfaces retained from that night, and what they retained from the hours and days that followed before federal authorities took custody, is now part of what investigators know, but have not publicly disclosed. Carly Aylesworth flew to the Bahamas while her mother was still missing. She stood on the deck of the Soulmate before it entered federal custody and described to Dateline NBC what that experience felt like. She sat on the deck and started talking to her mother as if she were still there. The kind of sadness, she explained, that comes from standing in the last place someone you love was seen, in a space whose surfaces might contain answers you don't yet have access to. She told Andrea Canning she didn't understand how her mother, an experienced sailor who had been living aboard for months and knew the water intimately, could have gone overboard the way Brian Hooker described. That assessment came from knowing her mother, not from forensic training. But what forensic examiners are now finding on those same surfaces represents the scientific version of the same question Carly was asking when she stood there. She was asking the space what it knew. The federal team in Fort Lauderdale is asking with instruments capable of hearing the answer. Carly also noted something specific about the phone call she received from Brian Hooker 25 hours after her mother disappeared. His tone, she said, was monotone and relaxed. Tone is not forensic evidence. It cannot be tested in a laboratory or submitted as physical proof. But it is part of the documented record of how the people closest to Lynette experienced the immediate aftermath of her disappearance. And it sits alongside the physical evidence as part of the broader investigative picture. Darlene, Lynette's mother, received the final message her daughter sent before she vanished. The message read, "I can't take it anymore, Mom. Get on a plane. Come home. I want my stuff." Darlene wrote back saying she wanted Lynette, not her belongings. Lynette had purchased a one-way plane ticket home. She never used it. The Soulmate was where she was living when she sent that message. It was the location from which the last chapter of her accessible life was written. And it is now in a federal warehouse in Fort Lauderdale, where investigators are reading a different chapter. One not written in words, but encoded in the chemistry its surfaces retain. The investigation is operating simultaneously on multiple fronts. The Fort Lauderdale warehouse represents the physical evidence examination. The FBI laboratory at Quantico is processing biological and digital material. The Coast Guard Investigative Service coordinates the overall criminal investigation. When findings from all three operational areas are integrated into the complete evidentiary portfolio, federal prosecutors evaluating whether to file charges will have the most comprehensive picture of what the physical record shows. That picture is not yet complete. The investigation is building it methodically. When it is finished, it will either produce a criminal charge or a public statement explaining why charges are not warranted. Either outcome will be reported by credible news sources and covered here with full attribution. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. His Michigan attorney, Crystal Marie Hauser, has publicly urged people to extend him the benefit of the doubt and avoid rushing to judgment. His Bahamas attorney, Terrell Butler, stated that Brian denied any wrongdoing and cooperated with relevant authorities throughout the initial investigation. The federal investigation remains active. No forensic findings from the Soulmate or Dinghy examinations have been made public. The absence of public findings does not mean the absence of findings. It means those findings are in the evidence chain, being processed and evaluated according to federal evidentiary standards before any determination is made about their significance or their role in potential prosecution. There is a specific sequence to how this investigation unfolded that matters for understanding where it stands now. The initial response to Lynette Hooker's disappearance was entirely dependent on what Brian Hooker told authorities. His account determined where Bahamian police searched, what resources the Royal Bahamas Defense Force deployed, and where cadaver dogs were brought in to detect the volatile organic compounds released by decomposing human remains. Cadaver dogs are not deployed casually. They are brought into investigations when authorities believe they may be searching for a body rather than a living person. The deployment of K9 units during the Bahamian operation reflects what investigators expected they might be looking for and where they thought it might be located. The search found nothing, not because it was inadequate, but because it was conducted in the wrong area, based on an account that electronic evidence would later reveal was inconsistent with the physical record. The GPS data from Brian Hooker's personal device introduced the first independent verification of what happened on the night of April 4th. That data showed his device had been in locations that did not align with the account he provided. A United States official confirmed to CBS News that the data told a different story than his words. From the moment that discrepancy was identified, the investigation stopped relying on the account as its primary information source and began relying on the record. That shift from an account-driven to a record-driven investigation produced every subsequent development. The Coast Guard returned to the Bahamas with a dive team, obtained permission from the Bahamian government to search new coordinates identified by the GPS data, and searched areas the original operation had not prioritized. The second search also found nothing, but it was searching in the correct location based on evidence, rather than the wrong location based on an account. The negative result did not diminish the significance of the GPS discrepancy. It intensified investigative focus on the one object that had been present throughout, the Soulmate. The vessel was seized while in motion. Brian Hooker had already left the Bahamas by mid-April. The Soulmate remained in Bahamian waters, with arrangements reportedly being made to relocate it. A transport captain was aboard when the Coast Guard intercepted the vessel as it departed. The seizure did not occur after the boat arrived somewhere else. It happened at the point of departure, locking down the chain of custody before the vessel could transit significant distance or be accessed by additional parties. Every surface on that boat at the moment of seizure entered the federal evidence chain in whatever condition those surfaces were in. Forensic examination does not require a clean chain of custody from the moment an alleged crime occurred. It requires a clean chain from the moment of seizure. From mid-May 2026 forward, the Soulmate's surfaces have been in documented, controlled federal custody. What those surfaces contained at that moment, whatever biological traces, whatever cleaning differentials, whatever molecular evidence, is the fixed record investigators are now analyzing. The thermal camera cloud data, referenced in investigative briefings, represents a category of evidence most people following this case may not have considered. Thermal imaging systems on modern sailboats are used for night navigation, identifying obstacles in low visibility, and monitoring the surrounding area while at anchor. When these systems are active, they record what they detect. When those recordings upload to cloud-based servers, rather than storing locally on the vessel, they create a record that persists independently of what happens to the boat itself. Cloud-stored data cannot be erased by cleaning a surface. It cannot be altered by moving the vessel. It exists on remote servers and can be obtained through legal subpoena without the cooperation of the vessel's owner. Whether the Soulmate's monitoring systems were active on the night of April 4th, and whether they produced a thermal record of what happened in or around the vessel during the relevant hours, is information the investigation possesses but has not disclosed. That thermal camera data is listed as a confirmed category under examination, which means investigators deemed it significant enough to include in the evidentiary brief. The significance of that inclusion is itself part of the public record. The dinghy is the last physical object that was demonstrably present with Lynette Hooker. The 8-foot inflatable with a hard bottom that Brian and Lynette used to depart Hopetown at approximately 7:30 on the evening of April 4th is the vessel that was in the water with both of them, or with one of them, or with neither of them during the hours Lynette disappeared. Whatever occurred in or around that dinghy between departure from Hopetown and Brian Hooker's arrival at Marsh Harbour Marina around 4 in the morning is the core event this investigation is reconstructing. The dinghy cannot provide testimony, but its surfaces retain a physical record of what they contacted that night. It has been in federal custody, examined with the same forensic toolkit applied to the Soulmate: luminol analysis, DNA swabs, differential cleaning documentation. Every square inch of an 8-foot dinghy that was in the water on April 4th has been in the federal evidence chain since seizure. What those surfaces showed is not public information, but it is part of the portfolio federal investigators are building. What the dinghy's physical record shows, in combination with the Soulmate's record, the GPS data, the navigation logs, the thermal camera information, and all other evidence categories, is the question CGI's and the FBI laboratory at Quantico are now positioned to answer comprehensively. The answer exists. It is not pending discovery. The forensic work has been completed. The luminol has been applied. The swabs have been taken. The digital data has been extracted. The differential cleaning analysis has been documented. What is pending is not the creation of findings, but their entry into the public record through official channels. When that happens, this information will be reported by credible news organizations and covered here with full sourcing and attribution. There is a forensic principle worth understanding because it explains how federal prosecutors evaluate whether to file charges in cases built primarily on physical evidence. A single piece of evidence, no matter how compelling, can often be explained. A GPS discrepancy might be attributed to device malfunction. A navigation log anomaly might be explained by unusual weather. A DNA sample in an unexpected location might result from contamination. But as the number of independent pieces of evidence increases, each generated by different instruments with no reason to correlate, unless they are documenting the same underlying event, the ability to explain them away collectively diminishes. The GPS discrepancy cannot be attributed to the same malfunction that might explain the vessel's navigation record. The luminol result cannot be dismissed with the same explanation that might account for a DNA swab finding. The thermal camera data cannot be explained by the same coincidence that might justify a differential cleaning pattern. When independent evidence sources converge, each pointing toward the same conclusion, the federal charge threshold is not about whether any single piece is sufficient. It is about whether the convergence as a whole supports prosecution beyond a reasonable doubt. The investigation is actively building that convergence. The Soulmate examination is its current focal point. The dinghy examination has already been completed. The GPS data has been documented. The vessel's navigation record is in the evidence chain. The thermal camera data has been obtained if it existed. What remains is the complete forensic analysis of the Soulmate's physical surfaces, the luminol documentation, the DNA results, the differential cleaning report. When those analyses are finished, and the full portfolio is evaluated by federal prosecutors against the charge threshold, the investigation will reach its decision point. Brian Hooker left the Bahamas with the investigation ongoing. He also left the Soulmate behind, reportedly arranged for transport back to the United States. The Coast Guard intercepted the vessel before that transport was completed. The question of where the boat was headed, and what Brian Hooker intended to do with it, has not been answered in the public record. What is confirmed is that the Soulmate was in motion, actively being moved, when federal authorities seized it. The chain of custody began at that moment. Every surface on the vessel, at the point of seizure, entered the federal evidence chain in its existing condition. From mid-May 2026, those surfaces have been in documented, controlled custody. What they contained at that moment, whatever biological evidence, whatever cleaning differentials, whatever molecular traces, is the fixed record investigators are now interpreting. People who have followed this case since April 4th have consistently been one step behind the physical evidence. The initial search followed an account. The GPS data revealed that account was inconsistent with the electronic record. The second search followed the data. The Soulmate seizure followed mounting evidence. The possible murder designation followed the seizure. The forensic examination in Fort Lauderdale followed the designation. At each stage, the public learned about a development after the investigation had already moved to the next phase. By the time the GPS discrepancy became public, investigators had already advanced to examining the vessel. By the time the Soulmate's arrival in Fort Pierce was reported, forensic work had already begun. By the time the relocation to Fort Lauderdale was announced, warehouse examination was already underway. The public is always at least one chapter behind what the investigation knows. When Brian Hooker arrived at Marsh Harbor Marina at approximately 4 in the morning on April 5th, he did not call police directly. He told someone at the marina what had happened, and that person notified authorities. That is a documented detail. A man arriving alone, without his wife in the early morning hours, did not make the emergency call himself. He reached shore, informed someone at the marina, and marina personnel contacted the authorities. The sequence of events in those first hours was not driven by Brian Hooker's direct initiative, but by other people acting on what he told them. The search launched on that basis. The Soulmate was not immediately secured as a potential crime scene. The area searched was the area his account described. The dinghy was the vessel he arrived in, and in the days following, before his arrest on April 8th, the Soulmate remained accessible at Elbow Cay. What investigators are now doing in Fort Lauderdale is reading the physical record of a vessel that was accessible during the period between April 4th and mid-May 2026, accessible to the one person who knew exactly what had or had not happened on it. 3 possible findings could emerge from the forensic examination. First, the surfaces retained evidence of whatever happened, preserved in molecular traces that cleaning could not eliminate. Second, the surfaces were altered during the period they remained accessible, and that alteration left its own forensic signature in the form of differential cleaning patterns. Third, the habitation pattern of 2 people living aboard for an extended period explains everything the surfaces currently show, and no anomalies exist that require additional explanation. Each of these findings has different implications. Each is a definitive answer, and the answer reflecting which of the 3 the forensic record actually supports is already in the evidence chain. Carly Aylesworth, standing on the Soulmate's deck in the Bahamas before federal seizure, was asking the space what it knew, but without the instruments to hear its answer. The federal forensic team in Fort Lauderdale has those instruments. The space is answering. That answer has not been made public. When a confirmed source reports what the forensic examination produced, when charges are filed, or the investigation reaches a publicly confirmed turning point, it will be covered here, with every source named, every claim attributed, Every element verified before publication. The Soulmate is the vessel on which the last confirmed chapter of Lynette Hooker's accessible life was written. It was where she and Brian Hooker were living when her mother Darlene received that final message. It was the location from which whatever happened on the evening of April 4th was preceded by the documented life they shared aboard it. The Soulmate is now in a federal warehouse where forensic examiners are reading the chapter that follows. Not a chapter written in words, but one written in chemistry, in molecular evidence, in the digital record of a vessel that cannot revise its own logs. The question this episode is built around, whether there is blood evidence on the Soulmate that someone attempted to remove, is the question the forensic examination is designed to answer. The investigation has that answer. The public will have it when the investigation confirms it through official channels. The framework for understanding what that answer means, when it arrives, has been established across these two episodes. The forensic capabilities have been explained. The evidence categories have been identified. The investigative progression has been documented. When the next confirmed development enters the public record, the people who have stayed with this coverage will understand immediately what it means and why it matters. Lynette Hooker has been missing since April 4th, 2026. No one has been charged with any crime in connection with her disappearance. Brian Hooker has denied any wrongdoing through his legal representation. The Coast Guard Investigative Service investigation remains open and active. The FBI laboratory at Quantico continues processing physical evidence. The forensic examination of the Soulmate and the 8-foot dinghy is ongoing. No forensic findings from either examination have been confirmed publicly. All forensic science described in this coverage reflects established scientific methodology and does not constitute confirmation of specific findings in this particular case. The questions raised here are investigative questions framed precisely as the forensic examination is designed to answer them. If you've made it to the end of Part 2, you understand this case is being built on evidence, not speculation. Subscribe to True Crime Vic for the next confirmed development in the Lynette Hooker investigation. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the update when forensic findings enter the public record. Like this video if you value fact-based coverage that respects both the victim and the investigative process. Share it with anyone following this case who needs the framework to understand what happens next. Comment below with where you're watching from and what part of the forensic examination you think will be most significant when results are disclosed. This channel exists to bring you sourced, verified, accurate coverage the moment developments are confirmed. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. The evidence is in the chain. The answer exists. True Crime Vic will be here when it becomes public.